Jesus' death is the most important thing to understand about Christianity. If we don't understand his death, we don't understand Christianity. And if we do understand it, then we grasp the heart of what it's about. And so Good Friday, we can see as the most important festival, the most important element of the Christian calendar. We're reading 4 passages today from Matthew's Gospel as well as one from Isaiah. And I'm going to comment briefly on each of the Matthew readings. And the first passage that we've just had read pushes us to think about the question of guilt, how it's dealt with, both by God and by us. Guilt has both a subjective and an objective side. That is, sometimes we feel guilt about our decisions, our deeds, or our omissions, things we fail to do. That's our subjective guilt. But there's also the guilt we actually have in God's eyes from heaven's perspective, our objective guilt. Judas, in the passage, speaks about his own objective guilt when he says, "I have betrayed innocent blood. I have sinned." Verse 4. That's his claim about his own objective guilt. He clearly feels it subjectively, but he's also right about it objectively because he did travel with Jesus for 3 years or more, saw all that Jesus did, all the miracles, all the teaching. And then he's accepted this bunch of money, this bag of silver pieces, to hand Jesus over to the Jewish authorities. It's a personal betrayal that leads Jesus to his death. He has betrayed innocent blood. And the chief priests, they actually agree, we're told. They call the money Judas gave blood money. In verse 6. Pilate's wife agrees too, as does the dream. She's had this dream warning her about mistreating, quote, that innocent man. So there's a claim about a lack of guilt in Jesus himself. Pilate sees Jesus as innocent too. He asks in verse 19, what crime has he committed? In Luke's Gospel, in the parallel passage, Pilate even declares there is no ground for the death penalty here. So you've got these statements about guilt, responsibility for blood. And then you've got different people trying to remove their guilt, their responsibility for Jesus' blood. And so Judas, he gives back the money. He throws it into the temple. That's about as close as you could come to trying to give the money back to God, throwing it into the temple of God. But Judas feels like that's not enough to pay for the gravity of what he has done, and so he kills himself, tragically. But we're supposed to see that even that is not enough to objectively deal with his guilt. So how can you atone for betraying the Son of God? How can you do that yourself? But Judas sees that what he has done deserves death, and he's right. For that is a teaching of the Bible. There's also teaching about how guilt can be dealt with, surely not in the way Judas does here. Sadly, the chief priests and the elders don't help him with his guilt, even though that's their job to help with such things. Verse 4, what is that to us? They say to him, that's your responsibility. They admit they can't help with guilt. Pilate himself doesn't want responsibility for Jesus' blood. He thinks he can get rid of it by washing his hands symbolically in front of all of the crowd, by stating, I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. And yet plainly, Pilate can't dodge responsibility. He's the one with authority and responsibility. Verse 26, he had Jesus flogged. He handed him over to be crucified. So Christians have long proclaimed that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate in our creeds, his washing of his hands notwithstanding. The Jews, they are stunning in the amount of responsibility for guilt that they offer to take. Verse 25, his blood be on us and on our children. They didn't need to offer their children's responsibility in order to secure this execution, which is what they wanted. Why should their children have responsibility? But they're so desperate to kill Jesus, that's what they offer. And we're left wondering what God does with such an offer. But whatever God's answer to that question, here's the point. At Jesus' trial, the heart of the question is, who has guilt and how can it be dealt with? The answer is that we people without God, we can't deal with guilt. And we easily fool ourselves that we can, but we can't. We can't do it by ourselves. The good news is that God gives us a way out of our guilt, for the image of Barabbas illustrates it. God deals with our guilt by providing a substitute of the innocent man Jesus taking the penalty instead of the guilty man Barabbas. Jesus dies instead of Barabbas, just like he dies instead of you and me, and for us in our place. Thanks.